Hello, welcome to the Center of Excellence for Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health Consultations inaugural conference, Equity from the Start. My name is Sherry Heller, and I will serve as the session moderator. And I'm joined by Ann, who will serve as our technical host. This session is being recorded. Transcription is available through the Zoom platform. And those little bells are people being entered. It's not happening on your end. We hear them too. Should you have any questions, please feel free to relay your questions to the chat, and we'll have time at the end of the session for questions and answers with the presenters. And I'm very pleased to introduce to you some of my favorite people in the world, some colleagues of mine. I feel fortunate I got assigned to this session, who have a really great presentation for you. And so I'm going to pass it on over to Angela and let them take it away.
All righty, thank you, Sherry. Welcome, everyone. We are going to get started. We're so appreciative that you joined us today. My name is Angela Keys. I'm joined by my colleagues, Kasia Plessy and Lauren Delahousse, and we all work as consultants or administrators in our statewide mental health consultation program called TICES here in Louisiana. Now that you've had a brief introduction to us, we want to meet you. So you're going to see a poll pop up on your screen. And please let us know the role that you play in this work. We have some mental health consultants, some program directors, early childhood, a couple of higher ed folks, some supervisors. Like we have mostly consultants here. Very, very nice. Thank you guys. It's almost everybody. All right. So welcome again. We are going to, we still have people joining, so you'll hear those little bells continue to go off a little bit. So a little bit of what we hope to do today. We hope that you will come away from this workshop with a better understanding of why it's important to have open and honest dialogue with young children about race. We hope that you gain a few tools for your toolbox to support teachers in having these discussions. And we also want to get you thinking about the things that prevent adults from having these conversations, but also the opportunities that are present when we do. We understand that this can be a sensitive topic. It's sometimes difficult to talk about and navigate. So while we are together, we want to ask a few things of you. First, we ask that you stay in the moment with us and be open to learning and doing some self-reflection. Honor what you're feeling in your body if something does come up for you, and give yourself permission to feel whatever it is that you're feeling. You probably won't resolve whatever that feeling is in the next 45 minutes. So it's important to accept and expect non-closure. This is a beginning. This is a beginning of a conversation, a beginning of a journey, or the next step of your journey. So we want you to really be open and understanding about that piece. And finally, we want you to get comfortable with discomfort, which seems kind of antithetical to what we sometimes want to think we do. And so why do we ask you to be uncomfortable? Well, because discomfort leads to shifts and movement and growth. So discomfort is okay because it leads to change. And for me, as a mental health professional, it's important that I think proactively about how I feel about issues of equity, diversity, inclusion, so that if I'm confronted with something in a center, I'm prepared. I've thought about it, I've done the reflection, I've kind of done some of the work, and I'm able to respond more readily and more sensitively because I have done that pre-work. So we ask you to lean bravely into that discomfort, because that's where the magic happens, right? That's where we see change. That's where we see growth. I'm really excited to be here with you today and to share this information with you. Now that we've had that kind of foundational piece, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren.
Hey everyone. Thank you so much, Angela, for mentioning growing your discomfort out of your comfort zone. Even me as a presenter, I have grown so much out of that uncomfortableness of being okay with not being okay, and reflecting and supervision and all that has helped me be okay with that discomfort. So we wanted to kind of see where our audience is at whenever they think of children and race. So we are going to put up a poll if it's working. I hope it can work. At what age do children first start to notice race? So I wonder if it's working.
I don't know that the poll is working, but if folks can just put in the chat, what's an idea of what age you think children first start to notice race?
See, I'll give it a few seconds. See a wide range between a couple months to a few years, preschool age. A lot of people chiming in. Thank y'all so much. 6 months, 3 months, perfect. So if you answered 3 months, you would be correct, which is such an amazing thing to think about whenever you think of child development and infants and their brain capacity, that at 3 months, they start to notice race. We're going to talk more about that as we continue, but I wanted to kind of set the tone that most adults in the US do believe that children don't notice racial differences until they're about 5. So they feel like they should wait until the child is almost 5 before they have those conversations about race. And if we just learn that children start to notice race at 3 months, we're missing out on a big chunk of time when talking to children about race. All right. So next slide. True or false? So mentioning race teaches children to be racist. Now, I don't think we have slides for this, so you can just kind of think of it in your head, or you can reply in the chat. So mentioning race teaches children to be racist. The answer is false. The myth is mentioning race will put ideas into their heads or poison their minds. But in actuality, silence about race does not keep children from noticing race and developing racist ideas. It just keeps them from talking about it. And as we know in child development, children are trying to understand this world around them. They're trying to navigate this world around them. So if we are silent about race and racism, they tend to create their own ideas or look to us of what we're doing and learn from our modeling, our own implicit bias. So no, mentioning race does not put ideas or poison in their head. It just doesn't help. It prevents them from understanding the world a little bit better. All right. Next one. Another true or false. Young children don't see color. The answer is false. So there is this myth that children are colorblind, and research clearly shows that children not only recognize race from a very young age, but they also begin to develop racist ideas by the age of 3 to 5, which is a very young age to start to develop these racist ideas, and is why it's so important for us to have these conversations. Raising anti-racist children involves confronting the myths that allows racism to take root in young minds. So by confronting and letting them know that it is okay to see color, it is okay to recognize these differences in our world, helps them understand the world around them. True or false? We should wait to discuss race with children when they're older. The answer is false. We should not discuss race with preschoolers because they're too young. That's the myth. That's what people are understanding or told. But in actuality, infants are able to non-verbally categorize people by race and gender at 6 months of age. So yeah, like I said earlier, you have this big gap of time between 3 months when they're starting to notice race to 5 years old whenever they're having these conversations. So yeah, we have a lot of time that we can discuss race and racism with children. So I've been mentioning 5 and how people tend to have this conversation with children at the age of 5. Most adults, like I said, believe that children don't notice racial differences, so they wait until they're 5. There is a significance to the age of 5, and usually what happens whenever a child turns 5 or 6, they go into kindergarten or preschool, their world becomes a little bit bigger because they're in a school system. There's a lot more diverse classmates. They're around different diverse human beings. Their teachers may look different than them, and they start to realize that the world is a lot bigger. And that's why a lot of families are waiting till 5 is to have that conversation. But also looking at it in a child's lens of how scary could that be? If you're entering into this big old world that you had no experience of before and weren't told anything, but now you already have these biases, these implicit biases, and we're going to talk about race at pre-K age 2, it's really scary. So I think helping children understand the world around them by having these conversations before 5 is really powerful for them. All right, so these were pulled from the American Psychological Association. It's an article that they wrote in 2020. At the age of 3 months, infants prefer faces of certain racial groups. So what happens is a 3-month-old will stare at a face that looks more like their caregiver for longer. At 9 months old, children or infants use race to categorize faces. At 3-year-olds, they associate racial groups with negative traits and are even choosing playmates accordingly to those traits. At 4-year-olds, they associate white people with wealth and higher status in the US. I kind of want to take a moment to pause on that one and just sit with it for a minute, because that one is really hard and uncomfortable. Thinking of a Black child that associates wealth with white people, or white people with wealth and higher status, and thinking of the power that that can mold their little lives is really hard and really uncomfortable. So obviously I am a white female sitting in this discomfort talking about this, but I want us to be aware that 4-year-olds are already associating white people with wealth and higher status. And the more that we're aware of that, the more that we can help challenge that with them, or sit with them, or talk about these conversations, or empower them to be their amazing selves, no matter their skin color. So yeah, that one hits hard. That one sucks. But that's why we're here. That's why we're having these discussions, is to be aware of that. So as you can see, that even from very young infants to 6+, they show preferences for certain racial groups. And if it's possible to notice the differences that early in life, can we really say that there is such a thing as colorblindness? Having these discussions can improve their racial attitudes in as little as a week. So if you have this discussion with a 4-year-old, even in a week, they'll start to challenge some of these implicit biases that they have within them, which is amazing. I mean, we all know how amazing kids' brains are, but whenever you hear things like that, it makes me feel happy, because we can make changes in such young children. Excuse me, I'm getting over this cough. So yes, we talked about colorblindness earlier and how there is really no such thing as colorblind. As this image shows, there is issues with coming from that colorblind approach, because you're not recognizing the challenges that people of color deal with on a daily basis. And that doesn't help you to recognize your privileges or address some of the biases that you hold. It is admirable to want to aspire to colorblindness, to want to treat people in equality across the board, to see them all the same. But in fact, it's not a thing. Your brain does not do that. Whenever you saw Angela, your immediate thought was, she's a Black female. Whenever you see me, you think I'm a white female. Your brain just does that it categorizes things without even realizing. So there is not this color blindness world that we can live in, but instead we can embrace our differences and we can teach children the beauty of diversity, and to see all the parts of every single person and not look through your own cultural lenses. That's the hard part, the challenging your implicit bias. That's the part that we're asking, and that's the hard thing to do. And that's what we want to teach our children to do. So actually, colorblindness is a privilege. Families of color in our country are more likely to talk about race issues than white families because they've experienced racism, because they have to talk to their children about the experiences that their children may have faced. White families don't have to do that. They can avoid having these conversations, but if we don't talk about race and injustice, then that silence allows for these issues to continue. And I don't know about y'all, but I don't want to continue growing up in a world or have my kids grow up in a world that involves racism. So having these conversations is so important to challenge the world that we live in, because silence about race just reinforces racism. And like Dr. Kendi's book, Anti-Racist Baby, discusses, anti-racist baby is bred, it's not born. Anti-racist baby is raised to make society transform. So giving our kids these tools to help transform the world that we live in is powerful. All right, I think I'm turning it over to Angela.
All right. So what we want you to do is just think, what is it like to think about? Is this the first time you've heard colorblindness, framed in this way as a privilege, and how it fails to recognize the experiences of others who may be different from you? So think about, what's it like to think about that? Feel free to put some of this in the chat. Think about what thoughts come up for you, what feelings come up for you. Get in touch with that. And if you need to take a little mindfulness moment, you can do that too. I did see in the chat, you asked, how do we go about having those conversations? We are going to cover that. We just wanted to give a little bit of kind of foundation and background before we get into the doing. And one of the reasons we want you to really get in touch with how you're feeling and what you think, and do that self-reflection, is because if we're so uncomfortable with this topic, then that's a barrier, right? And it prevents you from having conversations with the teachers that you work with about these topics. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard, if you have raised topics or you've heard things in centers, comments the teachers have made that really strike you in a certain way and make you know that it's not okay to talk about it. So what were some of those things that you hear that makes you hesitant to introduce the topic of race or racism? If anyone would want to share that, please feel free to put that in the chat. Because I know as a consultant, when I was in centers on a regular basis, there were times when I knew it was not okay. But something that was said or some way of being of the person. Yes, Katie, colorblindness is a limiting perspective. I agree. And yes, aspiring to colorblindness is a maintenance tool, yes. These are great comments in the chat. Yeah, why is it hard? Ask yourself, why is this hard for me? And practice, we need to practice. And if we are not comfortable practicing with teachers, we can practice with our family members, right? And our friends. We can introduce that topic and have these conversations when things come up in the world, in society. We can practice having those conversations. Yeah, race is only an issue because we kids. Let's just stop talking about it. We're going to pretend it's not there. Yes. Nice, thank y'all. Do we have a hand raised? With me screen sharing, it's hard for me to see if there are hands raised. So y'all are gonna have to let me know if there are.
None
I
at the
don't
moment.
see one.
Okay.
Thanks.
So yeah, the relationship with the person matters. If you walk into a center and just start, talking about race, we got to build relationships first. Think about the consultative stance. Yeah, and if we don't talk about it, just go away. But what happens is we all hold. Thank y'all for all these comments. What happens is people hold biases, right? We're all mental health consultants. We're all mental health professionals. We know about biases, and that biases function to make our lives easier. They're outside of our conscious awareness or control. So we think, boys are better in math, or girls like pink. And I think yesterday, one of the presenters, it might have been Walter Gilliam, talking about biases. So when I say peanut butter, you don't think ketchup, you think jelly, right? We're primed to make these connections. And it's all based on our previous experience. And it's just this efficiency in the brain that allows us to make judgments and make decisions without a huge cognitive burden, that we can just kind of go on and as Lauren talked about, even infants can start to categorize faces based on race in the first few months of life. Like before the first year of life, they're already doing that. Their brains are kind of figuring out those ways to sort and categorize people. And so we have these heuristics that develop in our brains to make our decision making easier. But sometimes when the heuristic is false, then it leads to poor decision making. And so it's, as our brains are sifting and sorting through and categorizing that information about the world, we're forming these implicit biases. We're learning it from what, these shortcuts from what we see. By the age of 6, children share the same implicit biases as their parents. By the age of 4, they're associating whiteness with wealth. That is happening. And it's because of these implicit and explicit things that they observe with their important adults, and that they hear them say and watch them do. So if a mom and child are walking down the street and an African-American man approaches and the mom kind of clutches her purse and squeezes the child's hand, that child is going to begin to be afraid of and wary of African-American men as well. If dad says something unfavorable about someone who identifies as transgender, the child will begin to believe those same things. So it really is just passed down consciously and unconsciously over time. And we have those filters in place. On the previous slide, it says, well, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are, because it's all moderated by our cultural filters. And when we have those filters in place, it allows us to only see the things that we choose to see. And that is a privilege, because we don't have to consider another person's lived experience. We don't have to think about the things that they face on a daily basis and all their intersectional identities that make them who they are. Now, let me be clear. When I say privilege, I do not mean anything that folks have worked hard for, right? Like, we've all worked hard to get where we are. We have done what we could, but there are things that folks have or are that have no basis in their own merit, right? It's that unearned privilege that has nothing to do with anything that you have done. So being in this country, being white is a privilege. Being male is a privilege. Being straight or cisgender is a privilege. Being Christian is a privilege. And there are benefits associated with being white, or being born into a wealthy family, or being straight, or being rich. There are real advantages that have nothing to do with anything that we have done. And so when we ignore issues of race, we don't want to think about it. Those comments that were coming up in the chat, like, let's just think about it. We're not going to talk about that. It's just going to go away. people of color and people from marginalized, minoritized communities do not have that luxury, right? They can't not think about it. They can't not talk about it. So colorblindness is not an option for them, but it is a privilege for those who are not of color. And when bias and privilege come together, it creates disparities. And we see it in the differences in suspension and expulsion rates of Black boys in childcare. Walter Gilliam talked about that yesterday in his plenary. Chantel Meeks talked about it this morning in hers. We see it in access to education. So schools are funded by property tax dollars. So schools that are located in neighborhoods, in communities where there are higher priced homes get more funding. And then we see even in early childhood education where quality childcare is more expensive. And so, folks from lower income communities are not able to access high quality care for their children. So these disparities play out in all of our systems. And, sometimes it's born out of implicit bias, and other times it's more explicitly, prejudicial. So it really is important to kind of think about privilege and bias and how they contribute to our lives, right? How do we benefit from privilege? How does our privilege protect us? Being educated, it's not an unearned privilege, but it is a privilege. But that's a protective factor for us because we're people who with higher degrees are likely to make more money. And so we have privilege. But think about that, and how does our privilege, especially if we're approaching things from that colorblind stance, how is that affecting our ability to engage in equitable practice as mental health consultants? So kind of think about those things as well. So we're going to talk a little bit. I apologize, y'all. I see the chat is lighting up. I really want to read it all, but I'm trying to be mindful of time and make sure we have enough to cover everything. But I really do want to go back and read the chat. I'm going to do that when I'm not the one speaking. So keep it coming. Keep it coming. I'm going to read it. So we're going to talk about a little example here. So Jennifer is a consultant working in the pre-K room. She's in her center and she notices that there are no materials that display diversity in the classroom. And so she wonders about this with the teacher. And the teacher says, we don't need to have dolls and pictures that show different races because we don't see color here. Everybody's treated the same. How could Jennifer respond to that? Y'all can put that in the chat. I know you have some great suggestions based on the chat that's coming in so far. How could the consultant respond to Jennifer when she says, we don't see color here? Any suggestions? Tell me more about how you've come to that conclusion. Thank you, Keisha. I love that. Tell me more about that. Very non-judgmental, not accusatory at all. Let's have a conversation about that. But it's scary, I know. Like, how would I respond to that? That's why we're here today. How would I respond to that? What else do people think? We all see the color issue is how we treat others that look differently, not that it doesn't exist. Yeah, how are you sure the kids don't see color? Yeah. I'm noticing that I do see color. It's just one color. I love that. I mean, I think I wonder what it's like for a child of color in this classroom to not have any materials that look like them. What do you think that's like for, you can point out a child in the room? yeah, have you experienced a time when you wish you were represented? I wonder what would happen if you talked about different skin colors. And yes, Katie, you will have to do some self-regulating. And look, this is a great segue because, you know, in the beginning of the conversation, yeah, step one is, you know, help the teacher think about why it might be important to have materials that depict diversity. But my next step is to like engage in mindful self-regulation, but that might be first, right? Like, okay, let me pause a minute, take a deep breath, do a quick self-check, a check-in with myself, and think, what should I say? And remember when I said this is why it's important to think about this in advance, right? And then kind of wonder about those things, these great suggestions that you have been giving. And I think it's important too to acknowledge the discomfort. Yeah, this is sometimes difficult to talk about because we in this country, it seems like we never want to talk about race, but it's there, right? We do have diversity in the classroom, right? You have children of different races in this classroom. So how can we talk about that? You know, it's uncomfortable for me, it may be uncomfortable for you, but I'm willing to go there with you. So yeah. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit of complexity to the situation, you know, just because I can. What if the teacher said, well, you know, the parents wouldn't be comfortable having their children play with, you know, a doll that wasn't of the same race? Would Jennifer's approach change? Would it need to be supplemented? Yes, religion too. Supplemented. How so? I love the emphatic yes, supplemented. How so? What should Jennifer say to that? I love to talk about ways to cover a variety of classroom materials. Oh, they're going so fast. Discussing race, even if the class only has children of one racial group. Yes. Yeah, let's speak with the director. Maybe the teacher doesn't have any control over what's in the room, right? The director buys the materials, put these dolls in your room, hang these posters in your room. Yeah. How's that message conveyed? Have parents said that to you? And my question in this is, I thought we didn't see color. I wouldn't say that, but you know, that would be my internal thought. I thought we didn't see color. But you're saying parents wouldn't be comfortable playing with a doll of a different race here. Yeah, how do you respond when parents share that concern? Y'all are great. I love this. This is great dialogue. So there's so much good stuff in the chat that I have missed. I am going to turn it over to Kasia and she will take over from here. I'm going to scroll the chat a little bit.
Thank you, Angela. So we have thought through why having these conversations with young children and their caregivers are so important. And now let's connect the dots and let's talk about how we can help support these thoughtful conversations in the classroom and within the context of consultation. We know that at the foundation, somebody put it in the chat. I was like, what a great sneak peek, because we know that at the foundation of our work is strong relationships. So in breaking down barriers in any situation, forming positive and trusting relationships is essential to engaging in transformative dialogue. We used the word transformation earlier. You know, we are looking for a transformation sometimes. So, you know, first and foremost, we want to focus on building relationships that will support open conversations about race and buffer uncomfortable interactions, because we know that relationship capital is so important. We're building this strong foundation of a good relationship. And so when uncomfortable moments happen or, disagreements happen, if we have that relationships, we're able to kind of navigate past them. So, you know, a part of building a positive relationship, a strong relationship, is being open and holding space for that caregiver's understanding of their world, their classroom, and their home. Because whether or not a teacher, sometimes I talk to teachers and they're like, I just leave all that stuff at home. I don't bring anything from home into the classroom. And we know that that's probably not the case all the time, right? We are humans and we are bringing our experiences, our lens, our culture into everything we do. And that's a good thing. It's going to be important for us as consultants to be prepared to address the variety of responses from caregivers when it comes to their experiences with race and racism, including being ready and willing to create the space for conversations many of us have been taught to avoid. So while some caregivers may not be open to a new way of thinking, consultants and early childhood professionals who model this openness will set the tone for approaching disagreements respectfully. We also want to acknowledge the feelings, any feelings that may be present when we're having these conversations. So we've kind of already talked about that. Starting, of course, first with the feelings that we are noticing when we are starting to have these conversations. So, we want to find the time to take a moment to self-regulate if necessary. And if it feels appropriate in that moment and you've built a relationship with this caregiver, you might want to describe your feelings out loud. You can say, I can feel myself feeling a little tense or feeling a little uncomfortable when I point out our differences, as me as a Black female and you as a white female. I'm pointing out these differences and I know it's uncomfortable. And I think this can provide validation for the person that you're having a conversation with, because they might be feeling similarly. They probably are feeling similarly and almost need that permission to say out loud how they're feeling, to say, oh, you feel it too. So we always want to acknowledge the feelings, and you might want to point out any reactions that the caregiver, the teacher, whoever you're talking to, may be displaying as well. I'm noticing that you seem a little uncomfortable about talking about this. I'm noticing that you may be feeling a little uncomfortable or angry or nervous, and kind of just labeling those feelings. And, always, we've said it and we're going to say it again and again, avoiding these conversations for fear of saying the wrong thing or under the guise that we can all be colorblind. It's just a missed opportunity for growth. It's a missed opportunity for growth for us, for the caregiver, and especially for the kids, because we are the ones modeling and teaching them. And of course, we also want to use the power of wondering. So we know that by wondering, we are avoiding the position of the expert when we're going into these classrooms, and we're encouraging other perspectives and facilitating the process of understanding that is going to lead to growth. So, we can wonder as a way to invite further discussion and collaboration. So I recognize that we're still getting to know each other and that we have different identities. I wonder how it feels for you to talk about your identities for me. And when I say identities, right, because this is kind of thoughtful approach to talking about race, but intersectionality is key in this conversation, that there are so many intersecting identities that many of our teachers and caregivers experience, and many of these identities may be oppressed or minority identities. So you want to recognize that it's very uncomfortable, and it could be a layered sense of discomfort and oppression just from in our society. So we want to recognize that and wonder how it feels with them to talk. I wonder what it would be like to talk to your students about differences in skin color. Oftentimes, as a consultant, we are always wondering. I know sometimes there are classrooms that are just kind of hard to walk into. Maybe it's a teacher doesn't really want to talk to me. I could tell it. Or it's it's a more difficult classroom, and you can almost feel that you are starting to avoid something, avoid a classroom. You don't want to make waves. You don't want to make the situation worse, and you don't want to make yourself more uncomfortable. And so we're asking ourselves, I wonder what it would be like to walk into this classroom and have this conversation with this teacher. And same thing with the teacher, right? Maybe they're saying, I don't want to talk about race because of I'm scared of a parent interaction, or I'm scared of whatever, but they just say that they don't want to do it. And so asking, I wonder what it would be like, let's say if you did do it, I wonder what it would be like for you to take that step and really collaborate with them to explore that and explore their perspective and kind of break down some of those barriers. And model having uncomfortable conversations. So I talked about the power of wondering. Absolutely, the power of the parallel process, which we know as consultants and part of our consultative stance. So, it's important to remember that communication is a skill that you have to practice. And it's not just with uncomfortable conversations, but it's especially for uncomfortable conversations. But, if you were, I said this in a previous presentation, I think of communication as a muscle that you have to grow. You have to constantly be working that muscle, and communication is one of those, and especially those uncomfortable conversations. So we have to work that muscle to grow, and having open and thoughtful conversations about diversity can provide teachers with models of how to navigate these conversations. So by you starting this conversation with the teacher, you are modeling how they can have that conversation with their children in their classroom, or with the parents of the children in their classroom, or with the director, or whoever they're they're engaging with. You are providing them that model. So let's talk about a practical strategy that supports conversations about diversity in the classroom. This is a video from Embrace Race, the anti-bias curriculum, that incorporates discussion about individual differences and similarities, and just provides a really good example of prompts that teachers can use to encourage these types of conversations. Not sure I can hear. I can't hear it. No sound. And maybe if you're playing it, Angela, maybe to unmute.
That would probably help. Sorry. I gotta get it to look, bring the little thing back up to play. There we go. So what do you have in there? You can draw them in there. Look at your face. What do you notice about your lips? Children at this age are constantly looking at what's different, what's similar. We have different cheeks, different lips, different noses. Getting them to open up about who they are, being willing to be present in the classroom, sharing who they are, whether it's just something that they like. I think it's the opportunity for them to become proud of who they are and their self-esteem, and how they share that with others, or how they might not want to. No. Do you want to show your self-portrait, Emily? Yeah. What do you all think? I love it. What was, I noticed that you had added something here. What were those? I'm done. On yours? Well, we're going to draw again, hon. They're cheeks. They're cheeks. And then I noticed your nose too. Everyone has a different shaped nose on theirs. Mine is down. Yours is down. So you have a triangle going down like this, right? Mine is like a rectangle. And I notice it's holding up your glasses. What shape is?
So that was a very short clip. For time's sake, we can't show the entire video, but I absolutely recommend checking out Embrace Race, their anti-bias curriculum. They have a whole video. And I mean, you notice the things that she's saying, and she's noticing, she's pointing out things about the children, and having them look in the mirror at the same time, and they can look at each other and just and notice differences and similarities. And so I love this video because, first of all, it's a real practical strategy, and there are many more on the Embrace Race anti-bias curriculum. But I think that people think that these conversations have to be very complex and very technical, and these conversations don't have to be. Like, how natural was that? So many classrooms do self-portraits already. So many of them, look at mirrors and things. So, I think that's just like a really good example of how easy you can incorporate this into your routine. So as consultants, we are, helping teachers create classroom environments that show diversity, and intentionally use materials. So not just having pictures and books, but using those pictures, using those books, creating strategies and social emotional strategies that really promote inclusivity and self-esteem. And then supporting teachers in responding to children's questions as well, and sharing their own identity. Helping teachers think about their own identities and beliefs, and how that comes up in the classroom, and then helping them kind of practice how to respond to any child's question, and knowing that they don't always have to have the response. Sometimes it's just saying, that is a really good question, and I'm going to figure that out for you, and we're going to talk about this later. That's okay. We want to respond to questions and let kids know that it's okay to be curious. And this, just briefly for time, I know, I wanted to talk about just little ways and things that I can see, and when I go into centers and classrooms, and how we can have this ongoing conversations throughout the day. So, talking with teachers about how the questions they can ask, the things they can say during their normal schedule. So, imagine a circle time where we go through and each kid says one thing they love about how they look today. And they say, I love my brown skin. I love my hair. I love my full lips. I love my nose. And that, is an opportunity to have conversations again about differences and celebrate differences. And maybe have those teachable moments in which kids are, pointing out differences or having conflicts, and you're able to kind of incorporate conversations related to that. There's another really great video on Embrace Race, their anti-bias curriculum, of a teacher eating a mealtime, and they were all eating rice. And so the rice is like, white rice, yellow rice, and they're able to talk about, what kind of rice does your family eat? So just so many opportunities to kind of, move these conversations, incorporate these conversations throughout the day. And we as consultants can really help teachers look for those teachable moments.
Asia, can you say specifically which link is the video? Is it the anti-bias curriculum video and manual? Is that what?
Yes, the second one, yes. So it's really great because it has the video, and then there's another button that you can click that shows the manual, which is like kind of a description of everything they're doing in the video, and follow-up things. So a list of books, like if you're starting to have a conversation about fairness and inclusion, they'll give you books that are really focused on that. So
I'm so sorry. This has been such a great conversation, and we have a hard stop. In a couple of weeks, the videos of the sessions will be put up, as well as the slides. So you'll have access. The folks here who have attended the conference will get an email that it's up, and you'll have access to all of this information then as well. And I just want to just a big thank you to Angela, Lauren, and Kasia for a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And I know I had a lot of thoughts popping through my head. So thank you very, very, very much. A round of applause.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Sherry.
thank you all. Thank you so much.
See lots of thank yous in the chat.